Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We're excited as always to have you here with us and to be diving into more travel adventures.
Yeah, absolutely. And so where we left you in our last episode was in Kanazawa, Japan. And so we're going to continue with our Japan series, sharing a little bit more about where we went and what we did. So from Kanazawa, we headed to Osaka, which I think is somewhere that a lot of people have probably heard of. It's a pretty major city in Japan. It's one of the biggest cities in Japan. And we were really excited about this because when we were in Japan last time in 2017, we spent a week in Kyoto, which, as you'll hear soon, is super, super close to Osaka. And then we did one day trip into Osaka and then went to Universal Studios, which is also in Osaka. So we hadn't spent very much time there. And we decided for this trip that we were going to spend actually quite a bit of time sort of based there once you went back to work and we were no longer kind of just vacationing and traveling.
Yeah, we talked about it on some of the other stuff we've done about the Japan trip, but kind of early on, I think we were thinking like, okay, we're going to go out and do more and go more places and try to get to smaller places. But as we got more realistic about the trip, especially balancing work and then having a kind of soon to be toddler, it just made a lot more sense for us to kind of settle down in one spot. And in Osaka, you can actually find like really affordable, nice Airbnbs in a way that you can't in basically anywhere else in Japan. So it just made sense for us. And then it was also a really good hub because there's lots of stuff in and around the Osaka area. And then lots of bullet trains that leave from Osaka to make it easier to see a bunch of stuff from that. So we felt like it was a great hub. And so we decided to spend 2 weeks there as I was getting back into work. And we were getting over our first week of adventure.
Yeah, and so we had originally planned to spend a week there. So one of the first things that we'd actually, booked was this Airbnb that we found in Osaka. It was a little bit out of like the main city center, kind of across the river in a bit more of what looked like a suburb area, but it was still really close to a train station and really close to a JR station as well, which was a huge benefit. And we were planning, our original plan was after the first week in Osaka, we were going to head a little further south to somewhere like Okayama or maybe Kirishiki. We'd heard really great things about those places. And then as we were looking at we weren't finding anything that kind of made sense for us accommodation wise. And so our needs for accommodation are a little bit different with working versus vacationing. While we were doing the vacation stuff, we were, like you've heard, if you've listened to the other episodes, we were in hotels. So just one room for the three of us. And that's not really feasible when both of us need to do a little bit of work while Lou's napping. You need to be working even when she's up. So we needed something a bit bigger. So we kind of went back to the drawing board. We looked to see if we could extend our original Airbnb. That place was too great. It had already been snatched up for after we were booked to leave. And so we found this second Airbnb, which was apartment style, kind of more downtown Osaka. And so what we decided to do was spend a little under 2 weeks there and do the first week there. We were like, okay, we'll use this week to kind of explore the surrounding area of Osaka, and then we'll use the second week to kind of really get a feel for what's in like Osaka proper, like in downtown Osaka. So do we want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and just a bit of contextual stuff. So Osaka, Kobe, Kyoto are all very close. Like it's one of those metropolitan areas that like you're technically leaving the city, but it kind of feels like you're continuing in the city. And so when you add all that stuff up, it's like the second biggest metropolitan area in Japan outside of Tokyo. And another thing, so you mentioned kind of staying by one train station. In big Japanese cities, there's often like the main train station and then the main Shinkansen train station. So you'll see like Shin, whatever. And so we stayed just within a 20-minute walk of Shin, Osaka, which meant that we could get on the bullet trains relatively quickly without needing to take a bunch of train transfers. And so that's kind of why it made sense the first week get out of the city. And then the second week we moved more to downtown Osaka, which tons of metro and train options, but you would have to go back up to the Shin Osaka station to get the Shinkansen trains.
Yeah, so it would have been kind of an extra minutes of like maybe an extra 20 minutes of travel time to get to these other places. And it was really cool being in just kind of a very local area. I mean, we did not see a lot of foreigners in that area that we were staying. We were in a really beautiful, like, Japanese house. It was really awesome where we were staying. So I'm glad that we did that. But basically, we ended up setting up our days where you did most of your calls in the morning, and then Lou would take a nap. And then it was kind of early afternoon by the time she woke up, which is like the middle of the night here in North America, where we're back now. And we would use a couple of hours, kind of like we normally would in like after work. And we would go explore a little bit, and then we'd come back, kind of do dinner together, put Lou down to bed, and then do a couple more hours of work. And so I feel like this sort of interesting different schedule worked really well, especially for exploring. But while we were in Osaka in that first Airbnb where we were closer to the Shinkansen station, we decided to explore a couple different places. So we did day trips to Kyoto, to Kobe, and to Nara. So maybe we can talk about each of those, what we thought, what it was like getting there, the experience, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so let's talk about Kyoto first. I think Kyoto is probably the second most popular tourist destination in Japan after Tokyo, but could be the most popular tourist destination in Japan.
It's super famous.
Yeah, so like when we went the first time, we went to Tokyo, we went to Kyoto, and then we ended up popping into Osaka. I feel like Osaka is like a little bit under the radar in terms of, it's a gigantic city. A lot of people know about it.
I feel like under the radar is not the right word, but I feel like it's just like not as popular as Kyoto. Like I think most people do what we did the first time, base in Kyoto and do like a day trip to.
Yeah, like we were staying in kind of a suburban area, wouldn't see many foreigners. Go to like the main Osaka stations and you'd see like a handful of people, and then you pull up in Shin Kyoto station and it's like, oh, like, 60% of people are foreign.
Maybe even more than that.
Yeah. But Kyoto is definitely kind of historically and culturally just a place that has a ton going on. So it used to be the capital of Japan, kind of early 1900s. The capital was moved to Tokyo. And also, I think one of the things that contributes to it is it wasn't targeted for bombing or fire raids by the Allied forces during World War II. So where kind of Tokyo and a number of other major Japanese cities were destroyed in fire bombings or atomic bombings, Kyoto wasn't. And so a lot of the historical buildings are retained. Although, like, to be fair, like if you go to places in Tokyo, you don't really get the sense that a lot of that stuff was rebuilt. But yeah, Kyoto, just beautiful. There's some incredible historical places. I think during cherry blossoms as well, it's just the type of place where it's like everywhere you turn, something beautiful is happening. And then, yeah, lots of history as well, and some cool like outdoor natural stuff.
Yeah, and so on the Shinkansen from Osaka, it's only about 15 minutes, which is kind of crazy. So you just hop on the bullet train, it goes super, super speedy. Kyoto station's the first one, you get off, and then, there's stuff kind of right there that you can walk around, and then a couple of different areas that have some really beautiful things to see and do. And we only had a couple of hours, so we just had to choose kind of one area to go into. And so we went and had some lunch, we walked around, we explored a little bit, and the whole time we were there, I was like, oh, I wish we had more time here. I want to come back here. Maybe we should come back here later. And I feel like that kind of became a theme for the places that we were doing day trips to. So Kyoto is definitely something that I would highly, highly recommend for anyone who's going to Japan. And if it's your first time, I think it's really worth staying there because, like Ryan said, there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of culture there. There's a lot of really beautiful things to see. It's really famous for palaces and gardens. And I feel like taking a couple days to kind of explore that is definitely something I'd recommend. I think in sort of a half day, couple of hours, you really can't see as much as I think that it has to offer. But we were really happy that we were able to get out there even for a small revisit and just explore a little bit and just be back there. It's when you haven't been somewhere for like 6 years, it's kind of hard to I guess you know that you liked a place, but it's nice to go revisit it and see what it was like again. And so we were kind of like, oh yeah, I know why Kyoto is popular. Definitely would love to spend more time there. Because we only had a couple of days and we had other places we wanted to explore, we just did a couple of hours / half day.
Yeah, and then the other place we did a day trip to, which is kind of the other direction from Osaka, is Kobe. So famous for Kobe beef. Honestly, don't know a ton more about Kobe, but we took the train in, explored for a little bit. Really beautiful kind of like historic center of town where there's like this interesting like area where there's old English houses and other kind of cultural stuff. And then, of course, had to go find somewhere to have a good beef lunch.
Yeah, for sure. I was really pleasantly surprised with Kobe. I didn't really have a lot of expectations with it. I think kind of the day that we were going while Lou was sleeping, I did a little bit of research and kind of mapped out a route from the train station and started looking at a couple of restaurants. I don't think that this is the way to do things. I think the way to do things would be to spend a couple of nights in Kobe, to do some like research on places you want to eat, to make some reservations in advance. I feel like that would be like the way to do Kobe. It's obviously just a little bit challenging having a baby because we were just like letting her sleep for as long as she wanted, getting up and going. But once again, it was just about 15 minutes on the Shinkansen, like Ryan said, the other way from Kyoto. So really quick and easy to get there, and then super walkable right from the train station. And I actually, the same thing with Kobe. I was like, oh my God, we need to come back here. And again, unfortunately, we didn't have time. But right from the train station, you can go up to like a beautiful botanical garden, which we didn't have time to do. And I really would have loved to see that. But you can walk around through the old center, get some food, and then you can actually head to the port. So it's a port city, and there's a really nice area to check out there. But Kobe is famous for Kobe beef, and so that's what we were there for. So after walking around, we kind of just pulled up some restaurants, looked at what had good reviews and looked like it was, reasonably decent prices, and then found something that was open and available to take us. And I feel like we really lucked out. We ended up having like an amazing lunch experience.
Yeah, really, really fantastic at this kind of like almost kind of like bar style. So I think there was like 8 seats or something, and the chef was right there as he cooked your steaks up, and had like different styles of meals with beef. I think one thing I would say just about like the timing for Kobe, I do think it's possible to do in a day trip. I think the thing just with having Lou that makes it challenging is we have to time it in between our naps. But if you were able to take like the Shinkansen there at 7 a.m. and take the Shinkansen back at like 6 p.m., like you'd be able to see a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's true. And you could also make a reservation because you didn't have a child that has uncertain nap times and stuff like that. But we were really happy with how it went. So basically with this meal that we had, I think it was like a 4-course meal. We got a salad with kind of like a beef tartare. We got a soup with some beef in it. We got like the main steak and veggies and rice. And then we got a dessert. And so I think I went for one of the lower cost cuts of steak, and I think it was just under 60 Canadian dollars. And then you got a higher cut of steak, and I think it was 115 Canadian dollars, something around that. And we each got a glass of wine. So I think in total we paid like 200, just under 250 Canadian, so maybe around 200 USD for our meal. I think that's not the lowest that you could spend at this particular restaurant, and it's definitely not the highest you could spend. You could easily spend that on just one cut of beef, like one 4-course meal. But the service was amazing and the beef was incredible. I feel like this was one of the best meals I've eaten, I mean, for sure in 2023, if not in the last couple of years.
Definitely. And there's also, should be noted, you can find Wagyu beef in other parts. Like there's lots of places in Osaka you can get it, but it kind of feels fun to go to Kobe and have that experience.
Yeah, for sure. And as we were walking around Kobe, I was thinking like, hey, I feel like this would be a really, really great city to come back and spend a couple weeks, maybe even base ourselves in for like a month or so. I just got really good vibes from it. It just seemed like really walkable and like a good size and family friendly. And obviously the beef is a big selling feature for us. So yeah, I definitely have Kobe on my radar to return to. I had a really good impression and would love to go back soon.
Yeah, it strikes me, we're always thinking like kind of, oh, if we were to come and spend a couple months somewhere, where would be a good place to do that? And so I think for both of us, Kobe like would be kind of on the near the top of our list in terms of places we're checking out. Central location, Shinkansen. My assumption is that like the prices are a little bit like more economical than Tokyo or maybe even Osaka. So could be wrong about that, but yeah, definitely up there on the list. And I think one of the cool things about just having like, especially if you were there with a JR pass, is being able to like take the Shinkansen back and forth. Because one thing being near the Shinkansen in Osaka meant that like it was as easy for us to get to Kobe and Kyoto and as quick as it was to get like places in the center of Osaka, because we could walk 15 minutes to the Shinkansen and then be 5 minutes there and 15 minutes to the next city, so kind of like a 30-minute trip. And that's what it took to get to like Osaka Castle or places in the center of Osaka.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then the last kind of day trip that we did while we were in this first area of Osaka was Nara. And so Nara is really famous for deer. Oh dear.
Yeah, beautiful. Actually, again, this is probably something where we could have the historical notes up. But beautiful like temples, beautiful parks. It's kind of like, one thing that surprised me was actually the size of Nara. Like the city is actually kind of bigger than I would have imagined in my mind. But you kind of leave Osaka, head towards the mountains, and it kind of a bit more like rolling hill, small mountain style. And then the kind of main feature of Osaka or of Nara is these beautiful open parks surrounded by a couple very big, impressive temples, and then just covered in deer all over the place.
Yeah, so I believe they're white-tailed deer, although I could be wrong about that. But basically you get off the train and there's like everything's set up for tourists. So this is another place that there is just a ton of tourists everywhere that you go here. And you can get like a bus pass and whatnot. So you take the bus that takes you to the parks. And basically we got off the bus and I was like, okay, like where do we go to find the deer? And it's like, oh, the deer are just right there. Like there are thousands of them. They're just everywhere. And there's a lot of people selling like deer biscuits, like these homemade biscuits that are for the deer. And so I bought a little package of those. So we had some food to feed the deer. And it's pretty interesting because like the deer are pretty gentle overall. There was a couple that were like trying to sniff out my bag and try to get my other snacks and stuff like that. But gentle overall and very used to humans, because obviously there's just like, hundreds of thousands of tourists that are passing through there consistently. And yeah, we kind of like walked around quite a bit and tried to get some photos with the deer. And then there were some like really busy areas. I feel like it'd been like the most people we'd encountered pretty much anywhere we'd been. So we walked a little further into the park and encountered some deer that were not as covered with tourists, I guess you could say. Gave them some food, got some like interesting photos and stuff. And I feel like it was like a pretty fun thing to do with Lou. Like Lou loves animals. She's super excited about animals. And so just being able to like put her down and have her like crawl around and kind of like walk with a bit of help to go like look at the deer. So she was like pointing and yelling and seemed to be very excited about seeing them. So I feel like it was like a fun activity to do with a baby. And I think it'd be really fun with like older kids.
Yeah, definitely. I think this one was challenging for us, and it'll lead into one other thing I want to talk about. But it took a long time to get there from where we were staying. So we got on the metro and had to take the metro for probably like 20 minutes and then transfer off the metro onto a JR line train, which was probably like a 45, 50-minute train. And then it was kind of a bit of like confusion figuring that all out. So in total, we were probably like an hour and a half. And then we got to Nara, got on a bus. So probably 2 hours by the time we actually got to the park there. And Lou was like not in the best mood for a lot of that, which is like very, very taxing. And then coming back, we realized, oh, there's a Nara Express train that goes right to Osaka Station. Or actually went to Shin Osaka, didn't it? Yeah. It went right to Shin Osaka, which would have been perfect. And
I think it took like 45 minutes,
It's
right?
45 minutes. So still a longish train, but way more easy. You come, you sit. It was a sit-down train versus like a stand-up train. So one of the things we noticed in Japan, kind of when we're using Google Maps, like because lots of places have lots of options, sometimes it's hard to see like the full list. And so when you're in a spot of like, oh, I'd rather wait an hour and take a direct train than take like this combo of 3 trains that's going to get me there quicker if I actually know where I'm going, but I don't know where I'm going. So I'm going to miss like one of those trains every time, and it's going to take me as long as the other way. So I think going back to Japan, that would be definitely something we'd be thinking about, is like play with the times, really try to like find out if there's express trains. And it also seems like Nara might be a little bit more easily accessed from Kyoto. Yeah. And I think it would depend just really on where you're staying in Osaka, if it's like a 45-minute trip for you, or if it could be like an hour and a half trip, which is kind of weird to think about. But yeah, I think that made it, and I think it was one of the first things we did on this trip where we were like on our way there, and I'm like, I kind of just want to like turn around and go home because I don't want to do this in reverse.
Yeah. And I think that, it's really interesting traveling with a baby who is now a toddler, who has big opinions and emotions, and she's starting to express them more and more. And that kind of started happening on our trip. And I feel like right around that point when we were doing that particular day trip was when it was coming out quite a bit. But it's interesting, like traveling with a kid where you kind of have these like great plans in mind, and it's like they just don't want to do it. But she's not old enough to really negotiate with or to show her photos of how cool the deer are going to be, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think that was a pretty challenging afternoon. Although once we got there and got into the park, it was really nice. We had beautiful weather. It was super nice to walk around. There was like good vibes there overall, and the deer were really cool. And Lou was really happy once we saw the deer. It was just kind of like getting there that was a bit of like a thing.
Yeah, I think we were going, like Lou was going through this transition where she really didn't want to be in her stroller. And I think at that stage we were still trying to like force it a little bit. The other thing was that she was just like in love with the little hoops that they have on Japanese metro trains. I think there's some like North American and European trains like this, but
like the handles that you
the
hold
handles
onto.
that hang from the roof, so that if you can't sit down on the train, have to stand up, you can hold on to them. Lou, I guess, is like a born gymnast or something, but she was like, rings I must hold, which she's like 1.5 feet tall. So meant either her screaming or us holding her up, or if she was in the ergo baby carrier, like me getting on my tippy toes so she could reach and hold on to the rings. Which kind of, it was fun, but did make me not want to take metros, because I was like, if we get on a normal train that doesn't have rings, Lou's just going to be chill. But if we have rings, I'm going to have to like stand on my tiptoes for like half an hour.
Yeah. So I feel like the way there was like a little bit challenging. And then the way home, we were like, oh, okay, this is so much better. Like nonstop train between Nara and Osaka. And then just like that 15 to 20 minute walk after, we were like, okay, this is super chill and easy. So yeah, I definitely would agree with what you said. And I think just like looking at the routes is really important. I think had we known that and it was like, oh, we just need to wait an hour, I think we just would have done that. I think that definitely would have been like the best option for us, rather than like finagling like a walk to a metro station and then one metro, changing trains, taking forever. I think the thing too with that particular location is that we were closer walking to like a metro station than we were to the JR station. So a lot of times when we like looked up the routes, it wanted us to walk to that train station and then take like a longer train. And so we often had to like look at it from the Osaka station. So just some things to keep in mind, because like the public transport is so good in Japan that it's like you literally could have like 10 options for getting somewhere, just depending on when you want to leave, where you want to leave from, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where if you were living there and knew your route, there's like some connections you can make where it's like, go to this place, take this, transfer to this station, and take this train. But as like us, we get off the train and we're like, where are we going? And then it takes a long time. So one of the other things that we should mention as well is that having one of the IC cards, so like the different passes, whether it's like a Suiza card or a Passmo card, really facilitates those train transfers as well. So when you get there, making sure you get one of those and you don't have to buy tickets as you change lines. So those were the main trips we took out of Osaka. And then in the second week, we moved from, if you were looking at Osaka from a map, kind of down into the center. Osaka has a really big kind of like nightlife district, which isn't like kind of a seedy red light district. It's more so just tons of restaurants, interesting shops, arcades, lots of noise. And then there's kind of a big main river area that's kind of full of all that similar stuff. And so we were staying really close to that, which was like a complete change of scenery from like super calm, super chill to like right in the middle of it. But we spent just under our second week there, about 5 days there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So in central Osaka, I feel like some of the highlights for us were, eating at a lot of great restaurants. There's really good food there. Going to Dotonburi, which is like right on the river, like Ryan mentioned. You can just walk there and there's like a million restaurants, all different types of cuisine, street vendors, shops, a million different things, and pretty beautiful, picturesque views of Osaka. And then there's a few like markets and shopping districts and stuff like that, just depending on what you're interested in, that are kind of right around that Dotonburi area and like Namba area. And then there's also the Osaka Castle, which I think is one of the main highlights of Osaka. So that was one of the things that we did. We hadn't done that before because we didn't have time to see that when we were in Osaka on our last trip. So I was really happy we got to go there. It's like super beautiful, really nice like park area to walk around. We didn't have time to go in the actual castle itself. I'm sure that would have been amazing, but it just didn't work with our schedule. But we were able to walk around the park and see the castle, and yeah, I love that. That was one of my favorite afternoons in that kind of second week in Osaka.
Yeah, just a beautiful space. Like there's like the main tourist attraction of going to the castle, and like only really on one side of the castle where like the parking lot is, you'd feel like, oh, there's a bunch of people here. It's a tourist attraction. Everywhere else was just like beautiful space. It'd be spectacular during cherry blossom season. Oh, yeah. So that was awesome. And then yeah, just going, eating. For us, this was like really the only time in our trip, I guess a little bit our first hotel near the Sky Tree. But this place, we were really like in the thick of things, which when having a toddler made it really helpful because we didn't have to go, spend 20 minutes traveling to go to dinner, to go to lunch, to go check something out. We could just like throw Lou in the carrier and go, which was really nice. And think if we were talking to someone planning a similar trip, I'd say like this, having a week like this or 5 days like this was really great because we got to kind of like do more stuff. And then when we went back to Tokyo and we're kind of in a suburban location afterwards, it was like a little bit more chill.
Yeah, absolutely. We spent a little bit of time in some of the arcades too. I feel like that's kind of like a must-do thing when you're in Japan, and I feel like Osaka is a really famous place for that. I feel like highlights of that were a photo shoot that we did as a family. We got some really interesting photos from that where they like doctor your face in very strange ways. And then also I won an amazing prize from one of those claw machine things, which Lou absolutely adores. So yeah, I feel like that was pretty fun. Ryan also won a prize too, so we both won, but my prize was better.
It was better, although I won first.
This is true.
Yeah, and then the other big kind of thing we absolutely wanted to do in Osaka was going to Universal Studios, which we'd been to before, and so that's kind of out towards, I think the south side of Osaka, out towards like the port, Universal Studios City. And so we've never been to the Universal Studios in California. I know the Universal Studio, the Harry Potter portion is just like the Hogsmeade portion, which is the same as California, but doesn't have like the Diagon Alley stuff that they do in Florida. And they also just opened like Super Nintendo World. So I think a couple things contributed to being like actually kind of challenging for us to get tickets. And we really should have booked this like further in advance. But the last time we were there similar season, went on a weekday, and it was just like super easy to get tickets. I think this time, because Chinese tourism to Japan only opened up in March, and Super Nintendo World is relatively new. And it'd been like, 2 years of pandemic where people aren't going to 3 years, almost a pandemic, where people aren't going to these attractions. There was like a ton of pent up demand. And so when we were able to get our tickets, but when you're looking to buy express passes, which you needed to be able to go into Nintendo World, and it was kind of unclear if you would need them or not to go into Harry Potter World, or not. It's called the Wizarding World. I don't know why. Something about it sounds weird. That was hard. It was like, oh, what day can we get it? Like, you want to just like book a normal one? It was like 3 months in the future. So, but yeah, we were able to go down there. explore it. It was kind of like a weird weather day. And we were kind of like, I think because of the Nara stuff, I think we were both feeling like a little bit nervous about Lou and like how Lou was going to hold up with that.
Yeah, for sure. We were, I think, both a bit anxious, especially because it's not cheap to go to Universal Studios. Like it costs quite a bit of money, especially with the express passes, which we did end up getting.
Yeah, and that reminds me, one of the things that contributed to it was the only express pass we could get was through a third-party site, and then we didn't know what time all the timed entry stuff is. So it's not like you can show up and do whatever rides. It's like you can do the Forbidden Forest ride at X time. You can do Escape from Gringotts at X time. You can go to Nintendo World at X time. And so it ended up, we were originally thinking, we'll go first thing in the morning. Lou will be super refreshed. It'll be great. Ended up getting all those times for like 4 or 5 p.m.
I think our first one was like 1:30 or something like that.
Yeah, Harry Potter one, it was like 4 something into Nintendo World. So we're like, ooh, that's like Lou's prime, not happy to be in a stroller time.
But she was great. We went, we had kind of a chill morning and then put her down for a nap. She had a really great nap. And then as soon as she was up, we headed to Universal Studios, which took us about 30 minutes on the train from where we were staying in downtown Osaka. And we got into Universal Studios. I mean, with any theme park, it's always a thing, right? There's like a long walk from the train and then you got to get in. And then it's like there's, checking your bags for snacks and water, which of course we had because we have a little one. And they're like, okay, you can take them, just don't eat them. I'm like, okay, does she count? Because she definitely needs snacks.
That was a great example of like the way things work in Japan versus like anywhere else in the world, where they're like, hey, the rule's no food. We're going to let you in with food and we're going to like trust you to not eat the food.
Yeah, like do not eat it in the park. And I was like, okay, I will not eat anything in the park. My toddler, I cannot guarantee though, but she will be clean with it. So then we get in and we start walking and we're like, okay, let's go like straight to Wizarding World and like check that out. We want to maximize time while Lou's like good energy, feeling good. And this roller coaster rushes by us and she just lets out the most delighted yell I have ever heard in my life. She was so happy and or maybe like alarmed or whatever, but it was like on the good spectrum of yells and pointing and just like seemed really enthralled by it. And I feel like that was kind of her vibe for most of the day. It was just like a lot of people to look at, a lot of interesting things to look at, like a lot of things to grab her attention. And so she did pretty great with everything.
Yeah, definitely on the good side of her like emotion spectrum, but just like kind of just like overwhelmed by seeing like a roller coaster for the first time. So yeah, that was really fun and really cool. Really busy. It's kind of funny the way like your memory works, because at the time I think we were both there like, oh wow, this feels like way busier than it did the last time. And then we went and looked back through photos and we're like, oh no, definitely like was just as busy looking everywhere we went. Yeah. Maybe not. Nintendo World was like next level, like terms of feeling like you're at like a house party or something. But like the photos we have from the Wizarding World, there was more people in the background of the old photos than the new photos.
Yeah, I think because it was a lot newer, so it was pretty popular. But one other thing I wanted to talk about was what Universal Studios does, which is called the Child Switch program. And they do this in the US as well. We actually found out about it through our friends, Jake and Michelle Champ, who you guys know from the podcast. They just traveled recently to Universal Studios in Orlando with their friends with their family. And they have a new little babe who's pretty close to Lou's age. And basically how it works, to give you guys like the short story of it, is that you tell them, hey, we want to do Child Switch. They give you like a little piece of paper that has like 2 like 1 and 1 on it. They check your express pass or whatever. If you're waiting in the regular line, you can still do it. So basically we went into like the castle, for example, for the ride in Harry Potter World and walked all the way through. You get to the front of the line. One parent goes with the little piece of paper, rides the ride, while the other parent waits with the child in this like little waiting room. And then once the other parent comes back, you switch the paper off, other parent waits with the child, and then you go ride the ride. So you ride the ride solo, which obviously is not the most ideal, but it's not like you have to wait outside while somebody goes through the whole line process, then comes out, then you switch off. That would take forever. So it's like you get to go to the front of the line and then switch off. So that was really great. We did that in the Wizarding World. We got some food, we got some butterbeer, we took some awesome photos with Lou. We headed over to Nintendo World, which was pretty cool. Like Ryan said, pretty busy. We did the Mario Kart ride, which was pretty awesome. Honestly, took like a really long time, even though we had express passes and whatnot. But I think it was worth it. Pretty fun. And then basically we just like walked through the park after that, because those are pretty far back into the park. We just walked through the park, checked some things out. I think we got like a little snack, got some popcorn, and then called it a day. But overall, I would say it was pretty successful. I love Universal Studios. Even though we'd been there before, I feel like it was for sure worth it for us.
Yeah, really cool space. And it's one of those things that's just kind of cool to do in Japan. I think that's like a whole category of things to do while you're there. Is just like, yeah, you got to do Japanese stuff, but doing like non-Japanese stuff in Japan is like its own thing. But going to, people say KFC is really great in Japan. We didn't actually go. We did go to McDonald's, and it was like just the standards and quality was significantly better than like a McDonald's breakfast you'd get here.
I mean, Starbucks is amazing. Like Starbucks coffee is actually like so good in Japan. Like I almost never get lattes from Starbucks because I just like don't like their lattes. I don't like the taste of their milk. And I was like, maybe I should just try one here. And I was like, oh, this latte is like actually delicious.
Yeah. So there's a whole category of like stuff you've done before, but you haven't done it in Japan. And so Universal, I think, is totally like that. We've never been to Disney World. We thought about going, but maybe at a future date. That's outside of Tokyo. And then Universal is outside of
Disneyland.
Osaka.
There's no Disney World in
Sorry,
Japan.
Disneyland. It's like Disneyland Sea Adventure or something like that.
Yes, I did meet a woman in the Child Switch program, though, who had a baby or an infant really similar to Lou's age, and she said they don't have that. So for any parents who are listening, who are planning that, who maybe have small kids, I think Universal is a little bit better if you have kids that are too small to ride some of the rides you might want to go on.
Yeah, we need to get a Universal sponsorship.
Yeah, this episode is not sponsored by Universal Studios, but if anyone has a connection, let us know. So I think that kind of wraps up our time in Osaka. Like we said at the beginning, we really enjoyed ourselves there. I feel like it was really nice to slow down a little bit. I think one of our biggest takeaways from this trip in general was that it's hard to move quickly with a kid who needs to be napping, with a toddler who has big opinions and feelings. We kind of, as the trip went on, just had to let go of being able to do everything. Like there were lots of other things that I wanted to see and do in Kyoto and Kobe. I would have loved to go back to them or spend more time in them. There were other places in Japan that we wanted to go to, like we shared, even like probably other restaurants and stuff that we would have really loved to try in Osaka. And it just wasn't possible because of having a small infant and just letting go of that and thinking of it more of like experiencing the place that we're in rather than like getting really caught up in doing all the things that there are to do. So I feel like that was one of my major takeaways from that portion of the trip in general. But for anyone listening, I really loved Osaka area and would definitely recommend a visit there if you're going to Japan.
Yeah, it's one of the things we talked about with a couple people who were fellow travelers of like, right now stuff's like crazy expensive in Tokyo, but we actually found like reasonably affordable accommodation in Osaka. I think that's like right at the top of the list, especially if you were kind of traveling as a nomad. You're like, hey, I'm going to do some work. I'm going to be in a place. I'm trying to be here for like a month. Really great city for it. A couple of things we didn't talk about with Osaka. It's got like the second most popular kind of international airport in Japan. So you can actually find pretty decent flight. I guess there's 2 airports in Tokyo and 2 airports in Osaka. So maybe the 2 in Tokyo are more popular. But Osaka is definitely the second city to fly into. So worth checking out. Like if you look at flights to Japan, look at flights to Osaka. So you might find a deal. We ended up going to a baseball game in Tokyo, but the Hanshin Tigers, who are based in Osaka, are one of the most kind of fervently followed baseball teams and one of the best ones to go check out as well. There's also a second baseball team in Osaka, but Osaka would be a great, definitely worth kind of checking out while you're traveling, but could be a good place to settle down if you're planning a little bit of a longer trip to Japan. So much cool stuff to do. It's a big city, so you have like all the stuff you'd expect of like a first class, world class city. Like there's Universal Studios there. There's like a cool Pokemon center. There's, big restaurants and all that type of stuff. My recommendation, if you were going and looking for a place to stay in Osaka, would probably be to try to stay near the Shinkansen station. I think if we were going back, we'd be looking to stay pretty close to the Shinkansen, but lots of cool places to stay, lots of fun stuff to see. So a cool city.
Yeah, definitely. And so just to give listeners a little kind of update as to where everything is at. So from Osaka, we headed back to Tokyo, where we spent a week. And we're going to do a dedicated Tokyo episode. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about what we did during that week, but I feel like it was just kind of exploring some cool areas. And I think maybe we'll do more of best things to see and do in Tokyo, since we've now been there on 2 trips and 4 times. So I feel like we've experienced quite a few things in the city. And yeah, from there we flew back home and are now back in Mexico, settling back into life. And we've been really happy to be back here, and then also missing Japan in many ways.
Yeah, and then talking about it makes it worse. It's like, oh, we need to go plan the trip again.
Yeah, for sure. So if you guys have any questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out to us. We always love to hear from you. info@theworldwanders.com. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for listening, and hope you enjoyed this episode.
Until next time.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wanders Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast, and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.